that they have.
Just a very short supplementary to Mr. Plecas. Judges have to, under Section 721 of the Criminal Code, when a report is requested for a repeat offender, it says specifically somebody's prior convictions under this Act, which is the Criminal Code, and then under any other Act of Parliament, and in certain circumstances, the Youth Criminal Justice Record. And Section 723, then the prosecutor must address the court. Now, what you're probably concerned about is what's in this bill, and that is the discretion given to the Crown Prosecutor under 727 of the Criminal Code, and again given in this legislation, that there's prosecutorial discretion being given under this bill as there is under 727 of the Criminal Code. I would suggest the criticism should not lie at the feet of the judge, but at the Crown Prosecutor. Would you agree?
Yes, I would say that in fairness to judges, that clearly the whole matter of plea bargaining influences what's going on. But at the same time, though, I'm reminded, and I mean, just to give you one example, if I may, we looked at all people who were arrested for a property offense in 2006 in one city in Canada, Abbotsford specifically, 416 people, and looked at how those people's histories had been treated by the courts in terms of multiple offenses for break and enter, multiple offenses for assault. And for example, if someone had their first conviction for assault, they would get a 2-month sentence. If they had their 7th, they would have a 2-month sentence. Now, and remember that that's not taking into account that not everybody's going to jail, in fact, relatively few. But here's what's more important.
What kind of assault? Assault simplicity?
No, I'll just say one last thing on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's dramatic here is when that person shows up in court for their 7th assault, they show up with 43 prior convictions and still get the same sentence. And that is the norm.
We can all go on for hours, Senator Baker. Every single element of this testimony would be worth several hours of debate, and we don't have several hours for every single element. Senator Carignan, followed by Senator Wallace.
My question is for Ms. Sheehy. First of all, you discussed prison rates, saying that there's a higher number of minorities who are imprisoned than non-minority populations or white people. Could you please tell us what is the reason behind this disparity? Is it related to a higher rate of minority communities committing offences? Are they more likely to commit offences than white people? Or is it simply that the punishments handed down by judges to minorities are harsher?
Suggests that there are no differences in terms of whites and blacks in terms of the rate at which they use or deal in drugs. There's nothing that I've ever seen that supports any assertion that blacks are more criminal or more likely to be drug users or abusers. So I don't think the answer is that these are more criminally inclined people or people who are engaged more often in the prohibited conduct. But what is true is that police surveil those people at much higher rates, stop them, engage in investigative detentions. The Kingston police reported that 40% of traffic stops, highway traffic stops, result in drug offenses, which means that those kinds of investigative detentions of drivers, or even at the street level, are highly productive for them in terms of catching people who are involved in drugs. If they use those powers absolutely randomly, you'd expect to see same numbers, proportionate numbers of whites and blacks. But we do not get those numbers. And so all the evidence is that racial profiling, in combination with the way prosecutorial discretion is used to the benefit of whites when it's not used to the benefit of blacks, means that you get these really skewed numbers in terms of who is prosecuted and then who will be at the receiving end of a minimum sentence.
Okay, donc,
You see this then as being related to racial profiling in the police services and by the prosecutors. Do you think there's also the same discrimination at the judge level?
Evidence, yes. I mean, I can refer you to one study that was done in Nova Scotia by a guy named Edward Renner, who sat in Halifax Provincial Court and watched the sentencing take place over a period of, I'm not sure how long he observed, how many cases they observed, but they found a marked difference between how similarly situated blacks and whites were sentenced for the same crimes. No blacks ever got a discharge, whereas whites got a discharge at a rate of, I think, maybe 14%. The Ontario Commission on Systemic Racism in the Ontario Criminal Justice System had a similar study, and they also found a statistically significant difference between how black offenders were sentenced for drug crimes as opposed to white offenders. I don't want to be misread. I don't think that our judges, our police, or our prosecutors are operating out of conscious racism. But I do think that unconscious racism is an important aspect that informs how people do their jobs.
Est-ce que c'est possible d'avoir ces études?
Would it be possible for us to have these studies? The witnesses referred to studies. Would it be possible for us to have a copy of them?
That I didn't put in my brief, but I will. I'm going to do a revision and add the Renner and Sajpal study. I'll add the Nova Scotia study for
What you can do is file with the clerk the references for those studies. That would be very helpful. And Mr. Plecas, you didn't have a written brief, but you did refer to some studies in your testimony.
I could certainly send along a number of different things which...
Written.
That would also be...
I can do that.
That would also be very helpful to us. C'est ça?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Yes, that was it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Carignan. I have another question. Very, very quickly then. Mr. Plecas, we've had statistics from Statistics Canada about the charges that are laid broken down by region be it for possession, trafficking, and import, export, and production. If you look at them, there seems to be a link. In those areas where there's more production and importing, the level of possession is also higher. And so there seems to be a fairly clearly proportional link, with the exception of Windsor. Do you have any studies on this? Have you made this observation that in those areas where there's more production, there's also more people being charged with possession? Have you found that as well?
It's available from the data from Canadian surveys on drug use across Canada, and of course the StatsCan data. And as you will know, that BC is leading the way. There's more possession charges in BC, but there's also more users in British Columbia than there is elsewhere in the country. I'm not so sure that there's a link, though, between more possession and more trafficking. And again, I'm reminded what should tell us that perhaps there wouldn't be a link is because whilst there is some indication that we've experienced some increase in drug use in Canada, that amount of drug use pales in comparison to what we've witnessed in terms of the production side. So I think that link is more a function of there's simply more users in different jurisdictions, and BC is about 2.5% of the Canadian average.
Merci, Senator Carignan. Senator Wallace, followed by Senator Milne.